That's what the deal was. It was turned all the way down in the studio. So I was wondering what the. So yeah, I had a loop started there. Listen to see what it sounds like on the Rumble. Sounds good in Rumble. Sounds good on Beam. Sounds good on X. Sounds good on D Live. Sounds good on Twitch. Sounds good on Kick. YouTube is up and going. Alright, so we've got everything going. It's getting ready to go. This is going to actually be the first live stream for Conspiracy on the Wonderful World of Weirdness. This is actually the second season, though. We did the first one on Strange Stories, my other channel. But this year I'm going to do the live streams on WoW, or the Wonderful World of Weirdness. So here in a minute, after I go get my coffee and everything straightened out, I will start the show. So, but like usual, I'm going to start it out with a little bit of music. And today I'm not going to do like an intro or an outro like I did with the other two. I'm going to just go ahead and do the stream and then edit the intro and outro into like I've been doing with the shorter ones. So let me go ahead and mute this all out now that I've figured out what was going on with the audio. And then I'll be back here in a minute. So what will we do today? Celestial Blueprints. Here we go. I'll do the War Machine for Mr. Robot.
War pigs gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Evil minds that plot destruction, the sorcerers of death construction. In the fields, the bodies burning as the war machine keeps turning. They bring death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh Lord, yeah. Leaders gathered in their chambers, deals struck in shadowed whispers. Evil hands that draw the borders, blood for oil, the world disorder. In the streets, the children crying as the bombs keep falling, flying. Death and silence claim the land, genocide by ruthless hand. Oh Lord, yeah. Politicians hide behind their walls, they only profit from the war. Why should they care who lives or dies? They leave the suffering to the poor. Yeah, yeah. Time will tell on their hollow lies, stealing lives for a barrel of gold, treating nations as their chessboard. Wait till their judgment takes hold. Yeah. Now in darkness, Gaza judges through the times. Oh Lord, yeah. Blowback echoes, fires raging, terror blooms from seeds they're planting. Cities scream, the home front bleeding. War machine still feeds unyielding. No matter who sits on the throne, the gears of death grind on alone. Empire's hunger knows no end, our lives just fuel to spend. Flags may change, the lies stay constant. Promises fade, the war stays honest. They sell us fear, they sell us hate, while they carve up another state. The cycle spins, the wheel keeps turning. Hearts keep breaking, cities burning. When will we break their deadly game? Or will we burn in their endless flame? The people rise, the spell is broken. Rise as one, true words spoken from the ashes. Voices thunder, hearts aflame, they tear asunder. Every lie they fed now undone. Stand together, we rise as one. Oh Lord, yeah, humans will be free. War pigs gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Evil minds that plot destruction, the sorcerers of death's construction. In the fields, the bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning. They bring death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh Lord, yeah. Leaders gathered in their chambers, deals struck in shadowed whispers. Evil hands that draw the borders, blood for oil, the world disorder. In the streets, the children crying, as the bombs keep falling, flying. Death in silence claim the land, genocide by ruthless hand. Oh Lord, yeah. Politicians hide behind their walls, they only profit from the war. Why should they care who lives or dies? They leave the suffering to the poor. Yeah, yeah. Time will tell on their hollow lies, stealing lives for a barrel of gold, treating nations as their chessboard. Wait till their judgment takes hold. Yeah. Now in darkness, Gaza's burning, ashes rise where dreams were yearning. No more lies can hide the slaughter, bloodstained hands on holy water. Day of reckoning, truth is calling, on their knees the guilty fallen, begging mercy for their crimes. History judges through the times. Oh Lord, yeah. Blowback echoes, fires raging, terror blooms from seeds they're planting. Cities scream, the home front bleeding. War machine still feeds unyielding. No matter who sits on the throne, the gears of death grind on alone. Empire's hunger knows no end, our lives just fuel to spend. Flags may change, the lies stay constant. Promises fade, the war stays honest. They sell us fear, they sell us hate, while they carve up another state. The cycle spins, the wheel keeps turning. Hearts keep breaking, cities burning. When will we break their deadly game? Or will we burn in their endless flame? The people rise, the spell is broken. Rise as one, true words spoken from the ashes. gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Evil minds that plot destruction, the sorcerers of death's construction. In the fields the bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning. They bring death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh Lord, yeah. Leaders gathered in their chambers, deals struck in shadowed whispers. Evil hands that draw the borders, blood for oil, the world disorder. In the streets the children crying, as the bombs keep falling, flying. Death in silence claim the land, genocide by ruthless hand. Oh Lord, yeah. Politicians hide behind their walls, they only profit from the war. Why should they care who lives or dies? They leave the suffering to the poor. Yeah, yeah. Time will tell on their hollow lies, stealing lives for a barrel of gold, treating nations as their chessboard. Wait till their judgment takes hold. Yeah. Now in darkness, Gaza's burning, ashes rise where dreams were yearning. No more lies can hide the slaughter, bloodstained hands on holy water. Day of reckoning, truth is calling, on their knees the guilty fallen, begging mercy for their crimes. History judges through the times. Oh Lord, yeah. Blowback echoes, fires raging, terror blooms from seeds they're planting. Cities scream, the home front bleeding, war machine still feeds unyielding. No matter who sits on the throne, the gears of death grind on alone. Empire's hunger knows no end, our lives just fuel to spend. Flags may change, the lies stay constant, promises fade, the war stays honest. They sell us fear, they sell us hate, while they carve up another state. The cycle spins, the wheel keeps turning, hearts keep breaking, cities burning. When will we break their deadly game, or will we burn in their endless flame? The people rise, the spell is broken, rise as one, true words spoken from the ashes, voices thunder, hearts aflame, they tear asunder. Every lie they fed now undone, stand together we rise as one. Oh Lord, yeah, humans will be free.
Okay, so that's the end of that. Here in a second, I'm going to start the first episode for the season of Conspiracy. This today is going to be about the JFK assassination, and since we had the recently released files and everything, I figured that would be the perfect beginning for this series this year. So here in a minute, I'm going to go ahead and start my countdown in my head by myself, and then I'll get into the episode and start the topic. So here we go. Let me take a drink of my coffee. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second season of Conspiracy. This is the first episode of the second season. I'm Roger Hanson. I'd like to welcome everybody here. Today's topic is going to be, it's perfect considering what's happened, the current events that's taken place here recently with Donald Trump releasing 18,000, I believe, files of the JFK assassination. I've actually done some research on this, so I do have information that I did pull together, and I wanted to go ahead and do it. I did that before any of this. This goes back a few years. Some of it was a little bit foggy in my head because I haven't really gotten back to the topic for a few years now, but I was able to pull together most of the stuff that I thought was important when it comes to this. Now, before I get going, I do want to mention too that when it comes to a lot of the information that was released, um, you got to understand that this is it's most definitely not going to be anything that's really life changing. You know what I mean? It's not going to be the smoking gun or anything. They're just going to give you information that was gathered by the Warren report and things of that nature and what was actually taking place. There was some things that were discovered with these reports being released, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to find anything that's groundbreaking from it. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and discuss some of the things that I personally felt was pertinent to the assassination of JFK that wasn't necessarily mentioned in the Warren report or any investigations that were done, things that were overlooked that I felt could have been looked at, but was, in my opinion, purposely overlooked and not investigated. So that's going to be basically some of the stuff that I'm going to cover. I hope you guys enjoy it. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and get started with I'll get started with the topic. So here it goes. Now, the assassination of President JFK or John F. Kennedy was on November the 22nd, 1963. And it remains one of the most pivotal moments in American history. Over the years, various theories about the circumstances surrounding Kennedy's death have persisted, despite the official conclusion of the Warren Commission, which stated that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination. The Warren Commission report, released in 1964, was intended to provide closure for the tragic event, but it has continuously been criticized for a variety of reasons. Some believe that the CIA and FBI or other governmental or non-governmental actors may have been involved in a broader conspiracy to kill Kennedy. The release of new documents in the JFK assassination records records collection, particularly in recent years, has sparked renewed interest in the case. These files, some of which have been kept secret for decades, provide new details that were not included in the Warren Commission report. The revelations range from unexplained CIA and FBI activities to previously undisclosed witness testimonies and new insights into Kennedy's dealings with foreign powers. The JFK assassination records collection was established by Congress in 1992 with the passage of the JFK Records Act. The act called for the release of documents related to Kennedy's assassination with the goal of providing transparency and resolving lingering questions. While the CIA, FBI, and other government agencies have long withheld sensitive information, the law set deadlines for declassifying files. with a final deadline of 2017. Despite the deadlines, there were several significant delays, with many documents still being held back from public release. However, in recent years, particularly under the Trump administration, the National Archives began to release thousands of additional pages. The new information contained in these files have been subject to intense scrutiny and debate among historians, researchers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Some of the new information challenges the conclusion of the Warren Commission, while other revelations provide new context or insight into the environment surrounding the assassination. The following sections examine some of the most significant pieces of new information. One of the most significant revelations from the newly declassified files pertains to Lee Harvey Oswald's possible ties to CIA operations, which were not fully explored by the Warren Commission. While Oswald's actions leading to the assassination have been extensively investigated, the idea that he may have had connections to intelligence agencies, specifically the CIA, was largely overlooked in the official report. Several of the newly released documents suggest that Oswald may have had connections to U.S. intelligence agencies even before the assassination. In particular, reports hint that Oswald might have been recruited by the CIA during his time in New Orleans in 1963, as well as during his time in Mexico City the year before. These revelations challenge the Warren Commission's assertion that Oswald was a lone gunman without connection to broader political or intelligence networks. In one of the newly declassified memos, there are mentions of CIA surveillance of Oswald and concerns about his involvement with a network of anti-Castro Cuban exiles. These documents show that Oswald was under watch by intelligence agencies at a time when the U.S. government was heavily involved in covert operations aimed at undermining Fidel Castro's regime in Cuba. The Warren Commission did not delve deeply into the possibility that Oswald may have been a pawn or a CIA operative in a broader intelligence operation. One of the most important aspects of the newly declassified files is their reference to Oswald's trip to Mexico City in the fall of 1963, shortly before the assassination. These files indicate that Oswald may have had meetings with Soviet officials and Cuban diplomats, but they also raise questions about whether he was acting as part of a covert operation designed to involve him in a larger political struggle against Cuba and Soviet influence. The Warren Commission acknowledged Oswald's trip to Mexico City but failed to fully investigate the possibility that Oswald was a CIA asset or that he had been part of a greater operation aimed at either targeting Castro or manipulating the international perception of the Cuban government. New evidence points to the idea that Oswald may have been manipulated by both the CIA and FBI to foster international tensions and create a justification for military intervention in Cuba. The newly released documents also shed light on the role that the FBI played The newly released documents also shed light on the role that the FBI played in the investigation into Oswald's background and his associations. The FBI was deeply involved in monitoring Oswald before and after the assassination, yet key details about his activities were either overlooked or deliberately obscured. One of the significant revelations in the declassified files is the FBI's monitoring of anti-Castro Cuban groups in New Orleans and Dallas, which were potentially linked to Oswald. These groups were part of a broader anti-communist movement in the U.S., which included CIA-backed operations aimed at destabilizing Castro's Cuba. While the Warren Commission reported Oswald's limited interactions with these groups, the new documents suggest that he was far more involved than possibly understood. These connections imply that Oswald's alleged lone wolf status may have been an oversimplification of his involvement in a larger web of political and intelligence activities. Some researchers believe that Oswald's interactions with these anti-Castro groups could have been part of a covert operation that involved creating political chaos in Cuba, something the CIA had been actively pursuing at the time. The newly released documents also raised the possibility that the CIA had a more significant role in the events leading up to Kennedy's assassination than previously believed. The CIA's role in Cuba and its involvement in the Bay of Pigs invasion, as well as its covert operations targeting Castro, have long been known. But the new files indicate that the CIA may have had knowledge of Oswald's activities far earlier than was disclosed. Some documents suggest that the CIA may have withheld information or manipulated evidence that could have pointed to a conspiracy surrounding the assassination. There are claims that the CIA was involved in obstructing investigations that might have uncovered links between Oswald and other intelligence operations or operatives. The files reveal that certain aspects of Oswald's life and activities were scrubbed or obfuscated, particularly regarding his connections to anti-Castro factions and possible interactions with foreign intelligence agencies. These revelations suggest that the CIA's involvement in the case was more complex and shadowy than originally acknowledged. Many documents now point to the CIA's knowledge of key individuals and events, yet this was not fully investigated or included in the Warren Commission report. The release of the new JFK files has been a game changer for those who believe that Kennedy's assassination was not the work of a single gunman. The new information has provided fresh fuel to conspiracy theorists who claim that the CIA and FBI and other U.S. government agencies were involved in a cover-up and may have even played a role in the assassination. While the newly declassified documents provide intriguing new details, many questions remain unanswered. The CIA's involvement with Oswald, his potential recruitment, and the role of anti-Castro Cuban exiles remain shrouded in mystery. Additionally, there are still debates about how much of the evidence was deliberately withheld and whether there was any concerted effort to cover up the true circumstances surrounding the assassination. During Kennedy's presidency, one of the key issues in the U.S.-Philippine relationship was the continued presence of American military bases in the Philippines. The bases were not only strategically important for U.S. operations in Southwest Asia, but also symbolized the U.S.'s lingering colonial influence over the Philippines. These bases, which were remnant of the post-World War II military expansion, had been established under the 1947 military base agreement between the U.S. and the Philippines. Kennedy understood that the bases provided critical advantages in the Cold War, particularly with the looming threat of communism expansion in Asia. The Vietnam War was beginning to intensify during his presidency, and maintaining these bases allowed the U.S. to deploy military forces quickly to regions like Indochina. Subic Bay served as a critical point for the as a critical port for the U.S. Navy, and Clark Air Base provided a key location for air operations. However, while these bases were invaluable from a strategic standpoint, they were increasingly becoming a source of contention within the Philippines, particularly among nationalist leaders. The Philippine government, especially under President Diosdado Macapagal, began pushing for more autonomy and economic benefits from the military base agreement. The growing national sentiment in the country, along with concerns over sovereignty, led to significant negotiations regarding the bases. Macapagal's government sought not only higher rent payments from the U.S., but also wanted greater control over base activities and the ability to have more influence over the decision-making process related to the bases. This desire for greater control was exacerbated by increasing domestic political pressure, including from labor movements and local political factions that saw the American presence as a legacy of colonialism. Although no significant breakthroughs were made before Kennedy's assassination in 1963, the negotiations between the United States and the Philippines were carefully managed. Kennedy recognized the importance of maintaining good relations with the Philippines, which was considered a pivotal partner in the region. However, the American military presence was under scrutiny, not only from the Philippine government, but also from the broader Filipino public, who increasingly viewed the bases as a symbol of U.S. imperialism. Kennedy's diplomatic approach was characterized by his attempts to balance the competing priorities of Cold War strategies and Philippine sovereignty. As such, Kennedy's administration offered increasing economic aid and military assistance to the Philippines in exchange for keeping the bases in place. This support was framed as part of the broader U.S. commitment to preventing communism from spreading into Southeast Asia, but it also served to ease tensions with the Philippine government. The Kennedy administration sought to smooth over public opposition by pledging to work towards fair compensation for the Philippine government and offering more political autonomy. Kennedy's eventual assassination in 1963 brought in a abrupt halt to these ongoing negotiations, and the future of the bases would become a more significant issue under Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency. The Johnson's the the Johnson administration would continue the status quo for a while, but ultimately the pressure from the Philippine government and public opinion would eventually lead to a reevaluation of U.S. military presence. The issue of military bases would remain contentious for several more decades, leading to the eventual closure of U.S. bases in the Philippines in the early 1990s. The issue of nuclear testing was another area where Kennedy's policies were met with resistance from the Polynesian nations. Although the U.S. had committed to reducing the frequency of nuclear testing in the Pacific, tensions remained high due to the ongoing testing by both the United States and France. The U.S. had conducted extensive nuclear tests at the Bikini Atoll and Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands, which were administered as a trust territory by the U.S. Following World War II. The environmental damage and health impacts of local populations, as well as the broader concerns about the long-term effects of nuclear testing, had become a point of intense international scrutiny. Although the U.S. nuclear test had been reduced by the early 1960s, particularly with the signs of the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963, the situation remained volatile, particularly with regards to French nuclear tests. The French government continued its nuclear testing in Mururoa Atoll in French Polynesia, and these tests were increasingly seen as irresponsible and dangerous by Pacific Island leaders. Kennedy's administration had already committed to taking steps to curtail atmospheric nuclear tests, which were the most harmful in terms of environmental degradation and health impacts on local populations. The Partial Test Ban Treaty, signed in August 1963, was a major diplomatic step in reducing atmospheric nuclear tests globally. The treaty, which was signed by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, prohibited nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. This was seen as a victory for the anti-nuclear movement worldwide, including in the South Pacific, where the negative effects of nuclear testing had been deeply felt. Despite the Partial Test Ban Treaty, France continued to conduct tests in the South Pacific, much to the frustration of Polynesian leaders and neighboring countries like Australia and New Zealand, which had opposed nuclear testing in the region. The French government's decision to carry out nuclear tests at Mururoa Atoll was a source of significant tension between France and the Pacific Island states, many of whom were calling for a nuclear-free zone in the South Pacific. Kennedy was aware of the growing calls for a nuclear-free Pacific, but his hands were tied in terms of pressuring France. The U.S. maintained close diplomatic ties with France as a NATO ally, and Kennedy's primary concern at the time was managing Cold War dynamics, which made direct confrontation with France over its nuclear policy unlikely. Despite this, Kennedy's administration took steps to limit the environmental damage caused by nuclear testing, and the PTBT was an essential part of those efforts. In the wake of Kennedy's assassination, tensions over nuclear testing would continue to grow in the South Pacific. The growing resistance to French nuclear tests eventually led to the creation of the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone, which was formalized in the Treaty of Rarotonga in 1985. The treaty which established a nuclear-free zone in the South Pacific marked a significant shift in regional diplomacy, as it reflected the wishes of the Pacific Island nations to rid the region of nuclear weapons and testing. While the U.S. had played a pivotal role in the development of the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963, it was not until the 1980s that the broader vision of a nuclear-free Pacific became a reality. Kennedy's efforts, particularly in terms of nuclear disarmament and addressing the environmental concerns of the Pacific Islands, laid the groundwork for these long-term diplomatic shifts. Kennedy's diplomatic efforts in the Philippines helped establish the U.S. as a key ally in the region, but the challenges related to military bases and sovereignty would persist for decades. Under President Johnson, U.S.-Philippine relations became more focused on the escalation of the Vietnam War and the region's broader Cold War dynamics. Ultimately, however, the U.S. military presence in the Philippines would be questioned by successive Filipino governments, culminating in the 1991 decision to close U.S. military bases in the country. Kennedy's presidency did not provide a lasting resolution to the issue of military bases, but it did initiate a framework for continued U.S.-Philippine cooperation in the face of growing regional instability. The U.S. and the Philippines would continue to work together, particularly in the anti-communist efforts of the 1960s and 1970s, but the balance of power in the relationship would shift over time. In the South Pacific, Kennedy's role in signing the Partial Test Ban Treaty was pivotal, but his assassination left unresolved tensions regarding nuclear testing in the region. It was the nuclear-free movement in the Pacific Island that eventually forced the creation of the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone decades later, a legacy of the regional push against nuclear proliferation that Kennedy had partially helped to ignite. His policies in the South Pacific helped set the stage for the nuclear-free movement, which would culminate in the 1985 Treaty of Rarotonga. The assassination of JFK in 1963 has been the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation for decades. Among the various theories proposed to explain the tragic event, one that often reemerges involves connections between George H.W. Bush, his oil company, Zapata Offshore, and the CIA. Despite the official narrative put forth by the Warren Commission, which concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, alternative theories suggest that there may have been a deeper conspiracy behind the assassination, with figures such as Bush possibly playing a role, whether directly or indirectly. Before becoming the 41st President of the United States, George Herbert Walker was an ambitious businessman with close ties to political and intelligence circles. In the early 1960s, Bush was trying to establish himself as a force in the world of business and politics. He co-founded Zapata Offshore, an oil company, in 1953. The company primarily focused on drilling and exploration in the Gulf of Mexico and other oil-rich regions. Zapata Offshore's operations were far from typical for a small company. The firm quickly attracted attention due to its ties to influential individuals, including political figures and intelligence operatives. The CIA, in particular, had an interest in the company's operation due to its potential to facilitate covert operations, especially in regions where the U.S. interests were prominent, such as in Latin America. Bush's early connection with powerful individuals included members of the CIA, uh, were vital, and they were vital for his political ascent. These connections would later raise questions about the role that people like Bush might have played in the circumstances surrounding Kennedy's assassination. Zapata's offshore was not just an ordinary oil company. Over the years, numerous reports and researchers have speculated. No, over the years, numerous reports and researchers have speculated about its potential connection to the CIA. Some argue that Zapata Offshore acted as a front for intelligence activities, serving as a conduit for covert operations in sensitive regions. The company's ability to operate in areas like Cuba, where the U.S. government had significant interest, raised suspicion. One of the most significant events linked to Zapata Offshore involved the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. The failed operation, which sought to overthrow the Cuban government of Fidel Castro, was organized by CIA-backed Cuban exiles. George H. W. Bush's company was reportedly involved in the operation, although the full extent of its role remains unclear. Some critics point to the Bay of Pigs as evidence that Bush's business ventures were intertwined with the U.S. intelligence community. Zapata Offshore allegedly provided support to the operation by supplying ships and resources that were used in the invasion. This would not be the only instance where the company's activities seemed to align with CIA objectives. The Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1961 is one of the most significant covert operations undertaken by the CIA in the early years of the Cold War. The goal of the operation was to use Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro's regime and replace it with a pro-American government. The invasion was a catastrophic failure, with Cuban forces quickly repelling the invaders. The operation was a major embarrassment for President John F. Kennedy, who had inherited the plan from his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower. However, the connection between Zapata Offshore and the Bay of Pigs operation is crucial. The company's ships were reportedly used in the failed invasion, Specifically, one of the ships involved, the Houston, was owned by Zapata Offshore and had been used to transport supplies for the operation. Some have speculated that the company's involvement in the operation was not incidental, but rather a strategic move tied to CIA interests. George H. W. Bush was reportedly in contact with individuals who were involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, although there is no concrete evidence that Bush was directly involved in the planning or execution of the operation. His company's ties to the CIA and its support for the invasion are noteworthy. The fact that Zapata Offshore had assets and resources that could be deployed for such an operation raises questions about the nature of Bush's business operations and whether they were a vehicle for CIA activities. In addition to the Bay of Pigs, Zapata Offshore had indirect links to the Cuban exile community, which was critical in the broader effort to overthrow Castro. Many of the individuals involved in the Cuban exile community had connections to both the CIA and business interests, including those who were part of Zapata Offshore's network. Several members of the Cuban exile community were involved in various covert operations throughout the 1960s, often supported by the CIA. These exiles were part of a larger network of individuals and organizations that worked together to destabilize Castro's regime. The CIA provided funding, training, and logistical support, while businesses like Zapata Offshore could have been involved in providing ships and other resources for these operations. One of the most persistent and controversial elements of the conspiracy theory surrounding Kennedy's assassination is the question of George H. W. Bush's whereabouts on November the 22nd, 1963, the day that President Kennedy was killed. According to some accounts, Bush was in Dallas, Texas at the time of the assassination. This has raised questions about his potential involvement in or knowledge of the event. Several reports indicate that Bush was in Dallas on that day, although his exact location and activities are unclear. Some conspiracy theorists have pointed to this as evidence of his potential involvement in a plot against Kennedy. However, others argue that Bush's presence in Dallas was purely coincidental and unrelated to the events of that day. The issue of Bush's presence in Dallas is further complicated by the fact that at the time Bush was working in oil through Zapata Offshore, a company with extensive ties to intelligence operations. The presence of influential figures such as Bush with ties to both the oil industry and the CIA in Dallas on the same day as the assassination raised questions about potential connections between business interests, intelligence agencies, and the tragic events. In 1992, a memo was released that showed George H. W. Bush being listed on a CIA document as being involved in the intelligence community around the time of Kennedy's assassination. The memo was part of the declassified documents released during the investigation into the assassination, and it noted that Bush was in Dallas at the time. However, Bush himself has constantly denied any involvement in the CIA's operations related to the assassination. The CIA's response to these allegations has often been to downplay or deny any significant connection between Bush's business dealings, his ties to the CIA, and the events surrounding Kennedy's death. Nonetheless, the document's release and the subsequent questions about Bush's role in the intelligence community have fueled continued speculation about possible connections between Zapata offshore, the CIA, and the assassination. In the early 1960s, the Cold War was in full swing, and both the CIA and corporations like Zapata Offshore played critical roles in the U.S. efforts to combat the spread of communism. The U.S. government's interests in Cuba, Latin America, and the Caribbean during this period were intertwined with the business interests of companies like Zapata, which had interests in the region. Zapata Offshore's involvement in Cuba and other regions of strategic importance was not limited to the Bay of Pigs invasion. The company's exploration efforts in places like the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean were seen as strategically valuable for U.S. interests. Moreover, the business world and intelligence agencies were often closely aligned in the Cold War context, as companies provided the cover for CIA operations and vice versa. In the case of George H.W. Bush, his position as a businessman with ties to both the oil industry and the CIA made him a key figure in the intersection of corporate interests and intelligence operations. This intersection of business, intelligence, and political power would continue to define Bush's career in the years following the assassination of JFK. The question of conspiracy surrounding the assassination of JFK has been the subject of much debate. While the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination, many researchers and theorists have pointed to a larger conspiracy involving various groups with vast interests in removing Kennedy from power. These groups include factions within the CIA, the military-industrial complex, and the oil industry, all of which were affected by Kennedy's policies. The speculation surrounding George H.W. Bush's potential involvement stems from his connections to both the CIA and Zapata Offshore, a company with substantial interests in areas of geopolitical significance. Kennedy's policies on issues like Cuba, Vietnam, and military bases in the Philippines threatened the interests of powerful individuals in these sectors, potentially making Kennedy a target of a larger conspiracy. While there is no definitive evidence linking George H.W. Bush or Zapata Offshore directly to the assassination of JFK, the connections between the CIA, oil, and politics during this period are worth exploring. The potential overlap of these interests during the Kennedy's administration and the speculative connections between key figures continue to fuel debate and theories surrounding the events of November the 22nd, 1963. Lyndon B. Johnson comments about the potential international tensions and the risks of war following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. and that stems from several geopolitical and diplomatic factors that were at play during the early 1960s. The assassination of a sitting U.S. president was an extraordinary event, and Johnson, as Kennedy's vice president, found himself thrust into the presidency under a cloud of uncertainty. The comments were likely intended to reassure both domestic and international audiences about the stability of the U.S. government the emphasis and to emphasize the gravity of the situation. By the time of Kennedy's assassination, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was already in a very tense phase. The U.S. and the USSR were engaged in multiple proxy conflicts across the globe, including the Cuban Missile Crisis just a year earlier in 1962, which had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Kennedy had been widely credited for handling the crisis in a way that avoided direct military confrontation and nuclear escalation. Kennedy's death raised the possibility of an unstable political transition, especially considering that his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, had less experience in foreign affairs compared to Kennedy. Johnson himself was deeply concerned that the Soviets might perceive his administration as weaker or less competent, and he feared that any signs of weakness could provoke more aggressive behavior from the Soviet Union or their allies in Eastern Europe and Asia. This would have been a significant concern given the volatility or the volatile state of global politics at the time. At the time of Kennedy's assassination, Cuba remained a critical issue in U.S. foreign policy. The Cuban Missile Crisis had demonstrated the global stakes involved in any moves related to the Cuban government, which was under the leadership of Fidel Castro, a communist ally of the Soviet Union. The United States had been actively involved in efforts to undermine Castro's regime, supporting anti-Castro Cuban exiles and attempting covert actions, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. With Kennedy's assassination, there was uncertainty regarding the U.S.'s stance toward Cuba and the broader Latin American region. Johnson may have feared that any misstep could lead to escalation with the Soviet Union or Cuba, particularly since there had been significant tensions over U.S. military presence in the Caribbean and nearby waters. Additionally, Kennedy had been very vocal about his commitment to the Alliance for Progress, a program aimed to improving U.S.-Latin American relationships. The association raised questions about the continuity of these diplomatic efforts and the potential for instability in the Western Hemisphere. By 1963, the Vietnam War was already an issue that Kennedy had been addressing, though he had not yet committed large-scale U.S. military forces to the conflict. Kennedy had expressed a desire to limit American involvement in Vietnam, especially in terms of direct military combat. He had also spoken about the need for a negotiated settlement to the conflict, although his precise intentions remain a subject of debate. After Kennedy's assassination, Johnson assumed the presidency at a time when U.S. involvement in Vietnam was increasingly under scrutiny. Johnson's remarks about the risk of war likely reflected the concern that instability in Vietnam, along with fears of a Soviet or Chinese-backed expansion of communism, could spiral into broader regional conflict in Southeast Asia. Johnson, who would ultimately escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam, may have been indicating that the geographical risks of the Kennedy assassination could lead to a further escalation in the conflict. The association of Kennedy not only shocked of the assassination of Kennedy not only shocked the United States, but also had a profound impact on foreign leaders and governments around the world. Allied countries feared that a change in U.S. leadership might affect the stability of alliances, particularly NATO. Meanwhile, adversaries such as the Soviet Union, Cuba, and China might have seen an opportunity to exploit the uncertainty surrounding U.S. leadership. Kennedy had cultivated a reputation for being a strong, charismatic leader on the world stage. His assassination raised concerns among foreign leaders about the future direction of U.S. foreign policy. Johnson's remark about the risk of war could have been directed at assuaging global concerns that the U.S. would not falter in the face of such a significant loss. He wanted to reassure international allies that the U.S. would remain a stable, formidable global power. Beyond the immediate international concerns, Lyndon Johnson was keenly aware of the need for political stability in the aftermath of the assassination. Johnson had a reputation for his ability to work the U.S. Congress and get legislation passed, but he was aware that his transition into the presidency was clouded by the circumstances of Kennedy's death, as well as the conspiracy theories that swirled around the assassination. Johnson's focus on international tensions and the risk of war could have been a way to solidify his role as president and demonstrate his capability to handle crisis on the world stage. By focusing on the importance of maintaining U.S. leadership and standing firm in the face of global challenges, Johnson sought to reassure both the American public and the international community that the assassination would not lead to instability or chaos on the global stage. In the wake of Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon B. Johnson was not only grappling with the loss of his predecessor, but also the heightened tensions of the Cold War, growing conflicts in Vietnam, and uncertain diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, Cuba, and other international players. His comments about international tensions and the risk of war were a reflection of the precarious global situation that existed at the time and the political pressure he felt as the new leader of the free world. Johnson's presidency would eventually see the escalation of the Vietnam War and continued confrontation with the Soviet Union, but his early focus on reassuring allies and signaling strength in the wake of Kennedy's death helped to ensure that the United States would not appear weak or divided in the face of adversity. In this context, Johnson's comments about the risk of war served both as a warning and a reassurance to both the American people and the world that the U.S. would remain steadfast in its foreign policy goals and would continue to navigate the complexities of the Cold War despite the tragic loss of President Kennedy. John J. McCloy, who was a member of the Warren Commission, had extensive business and political ties that included connections to Nazi Germany before World War II. His involvement in Germany's industrial and financial sectors before and after the war has long been a topic of historical scrutiny. Before World War II, McCloy was a prominent Wall Street lawyer with the firm Cravath, Swaine, and Moore, where he specialized in international finance. His legal work brought him into contact with I.G. Farben, the massive German chemical and industrial conglomerate that played a significant role in the Nazi war machine. I.G. Farben was deeply intertwined with Nazi Germany's economy and was involved in the production of chemicals, synthetic rubber, and fuel that were essential to the Nazi war effort. McClure advised I.G. Farben and other German businesses before the war, particularly on legal and financial matters. He helped facilitate the U.S.-German business dealings at a time when American investment in Germany was still legal and profitable. McCloy later became Assistant Secretary of War during World War II between 1941 and 1945, where he played a key role in U.S. military strategy and policy decisions, including the internment of Japanese Americans and the decision not to bomb Auschwitz, despite knowing about the concentration camps. After the war, he was appointed U.S. High Commissioner for Germany between 1949 and 1952, effectively making him the most powerful American official in post-war Germany during the occupation. His role included overseeing the denazification process, but controversially, he commuted the sentences of several high-profile Nazis and industrialists, including figures from I.G. Farben, who had been convicted at the Nuremberg trials. Fritz Termeer, a high-ranking I.G. Farben executive convicted of war crimes, was released early under McCloy's orders. Many former Nazis and industrialists were reintegrated into German society and politics under McCloy's leadership. In 1963, McCloy was appointed to the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. His presence on the commission raised suspicions among some researchers due to his background in intelligence and finance, as well as his deep connections to powerful elites. Due to his background, critics argue that McCloy was part of a powerful network of business and intelligence figures who influenced global politics behind the scenes. His involvement in German industrial finance, his post-war clemency decisions, and his role in the Warren Commission have led some to question whether his participation in the Kennedy investigation was intended to reinforce the lone gunman narrative rather than explore potential deeper conspiracies. McCloy had significant financial and legal ties to Nazi Germany, particularly through I.G. Farben, before World War II. His influence in post-war Germany and his participation in the Warren Commission make him a controversial figure in the 20th century history. Some researchers believe that his presence on the Warren Commission was part of a broader effort to maintain the official narrative about JFK's assassination, while others see him simply as a high-level establishment figure with extensive government experience. Several members of the Warren Commission had backgrounds that have raised suspicions among researchers and critics as the official narrative regarding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Many of these individuals had deep ties to intelligence, big business, and Cold War-era politics establishments. Below are some figures from the Warren Commission who, like John J. McCloy, had questionable backgrounds. There was Allen Dulles, and he was the director of the CIA from 1953 to 1961. Making him the most prominent intelligence official on the commission. He had a personal vendetta against JFK, as Kennedy had fired him in 1961 following the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, a CIA operation that aimed to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba. The CIA had been involved in secret plots to assassinate Castro, and some researchers argue that rogue intelligence agents were also involved in Kennedy's death. Dulles had deep ties to Wall Street, elite globalist circles, and covert operations, raising concerns that his role on the Warren Commission was to protect the CIA's interests rather than conduct an impartial investigation. The CIA was one of the agencies most suspected in involvement in JFK's assassination, yet its former director was placed in charge of investigating it. Dulles played a key role in shaping the Warren Commission's narrative, especially regarding the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. After that, we have Gerald Ford himself, a congressman from Michigan at the time, who would later become the 38th President of the United States after Nixon's resignation. Declassified documents later revealed that Ford secretly acted as an informant for the FBI, leaking details of the Warren Commission's inner discussions to J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Ford pushed the official single bullet theory, which was crucial in supporting the idea that Oswald acted alone. By leaking information to Hoover in the FBI, Ford played a role in shaping public perception of the investigation. As President Ford appointed George H.W. Bush as CIA director, further linking him to establishment political networks suspected of involvement in covert operations. As Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren was reluctant to lead the commission, but President Lyndon B. Johnson pressured him into accepting the role. Warren was also involved in the cover-up of key evidence, including restricting access to JFK's autopsy reports. He opposed investigating CIA and FBI connections to Oswald, despite evidence that Oswald had been monitored by multiple intelligence agencies before the assassination. His role as Chief Justice gave the Commission credibility, despite his reluctance to fully explore alternative theories. Warren sealed key assassination records for 75 years, fueling speculation that there was more to the story than the Commission admitted. Then we have J. Lee Rankin. He was a Washington insider who played a major role in shaping the Warren Commission's final report. He actively suppressed witness testimony that contradicted the official story, such as evidence of additional shooters or connections to intelligence agencies. His handling of the medical and ballistic evidence was critical for being biased towards confirmed. No, his handling of the medical and ballistic evidence was criticized for being biased towards confirming the lone gunman theory. Rankin ensured that controversial evidence, such as discrepancies in the medical report, was either ignored or downplayed. He helped craft the final narrative that Oswald acted alone, despite conflicting testimonies and evidence. After that, we have Senator Richard Russell Jr., and he was a powerful Democrat senator from Georgia and an influential member of the U.S. military and intelligence establishment. He privately doubted the single bullet theory, but was pressured into signing off on the final report. Russell had deep ties to the military-industrial complex, which stood to benefit from Kennedy's assassination if it meant escalation in Vietnam. Russell's private doubts contrast with his public endorsement of the report, suggesting he reluctantly went along with the cover-up. His connections to powerful Cold War policymakers make him unlikely to challenge the official story. While John J. McCloy's pre-war financial dealings with Nazi Germany and I.G. Farben were deeply controversial, he was not the only member of the Warren Commission with a questionable background. Several other members had strong ties to the CIA, FBI, military-industrial complex, and intelligence networks, leading critics to argue that the commission was designed to reinforce the lone gunman theory rather than seek the full truth. Allen Dulles, who was the former CIA director fired by JFK, helped shape the Warren report despite the CIA being a potential suspect. Gerald Ford secretly leaked information to the FBI, pushed the single bullet theory, and later became U.S. president. Earl Warren restricted evidence, sealed records, and prevented deeper investigations into the intelligence agencies. J. Lee Rankin controlled legal proceedings and suppressed conflicting witness testimonies. Richard Russell Jr. privately doubted the report but was pressured into signing it. Given the background of these key members, many researchers argue that the Warren Commission was never meant to uncover the full truth, but rather to provide an official narrative that protected powerful institutions. Okay, that is the end of what I wanted to put out there. I hope you guys did enjoy this. We had 2 people on Beam. We had 4 people on Rumble and 2 people on X. and I don't know how many people were on D Live. I can never tell. So no comments. It doesn't seem. So I made it out. Oh, there we go, Susie. She's on YouTube. Sorry about that, Susie. But now I'll go ahead and read what she says. Susie 2020 says, "Are a lot of people getting sick where you are in Alberta, and people are getting sick super fast than usual? Seems aggressive respiratory systems." For me, I think it's probably this crazy weather that we're having. It just seems a little bit. It seems to be getting a little bit more extreme every year. I don't know. I'm not gonna try to say that has anything to really do with the shot or anything, but I can tell you one thing: this weather is getting crazy, so it could be that. So that's just my take on it. But thank you for making the comment and everything, and that's basically the best I can say about that. Maybe later we'll know, But other than that, we don't have any comments other than what Susie said. So um, I have it. I have made it through my stream without having to deal with too many comments. So I was able to escape. So with that, I am going to go ahead and end this. But before I do, I'm going to say thank you for watching. If you like this stream, please like, subscribe, share, make comments. Please make comments. I love to hear feedback. I love to have conversations in the comment section. Um, that's very important to me. So if you got time, go down there and make some comments. If you want to join us on Discord, we have the links supplied in the description below. Feel free to join us on Skype or Element. We're also on X, and we'd like to hear from you there too. So feel free to stop in and say hi. With that being said, I am going to again say thank you, and I'm going to end this stream so that I can go to the bathroom. Talk to you later, guys.